Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and I'm here today with a video on coloring with your colored pencils on Kraft cardstock. Now I'm going to be making a true one-layer card today, so I have an A2 Kraft card base here. I made this myself and I'm just putting this into my MISTI. Now I will be using Memento ink to stamp with this. I planned on blending out my colored pencils with some Gamsol, so that's why I used this ink. However, I didn't end up needing to do any blending. So if you wanted to use a black dye ink on this, that would probably be better. So I'm going to go ahead and I first showed my black dye ink, but then I went ahead and picked out my Memento just in case I needed to do any blending. But I have this Fresh Bouquet stamp set from Inspired by Stamping, and I'm inking it up. Now I place this in the bottom left hand corner of my card base, and I'm just going to stamp this directly onto it. Now I will do this a couple times just to get the ink a little bit darker on that Kraft cardstock, and this is a larger stamp, so you need a few stampings to get it nice and rich and dark. And if you haven't been over to my blog yet, you will know, or you won't know, but I'll tell you, I am joining the Inspired by Stamping design team. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of their stamps on my blog and YouTube channel here. They are high quality stamps. I've used them before. They are made in the USA. And you can see that this stamp I have here, I've used it a few times before and it's got staining on it. Now I know a lot of people don't like staining on their stamps. I personally do, because when it stains, I know it's a well-made, good quality stamp. So whenever I see staining, I know it's a good choice. So I will be joining their design team and I will be using their stamps a lot more in the future. So I went ahead and stamped that down in the bottom left hand corner on that card base. I moved that card base down and I'm going to stamp this just very slightly in the top right hand corner as well. Now I'm going to pull out my colored pencils. Now in the past I have used just like your crayons you can pick up at your kids craft section, so Crayolas and the Crazy Art pencils, and those work really well for me. They worked for a long time for me, and I didn't want to invest a lot of money in something that I didn't enjoy. So that's what I started out with. I used those colored pencils for a long time. Once I got comfortable with them, once I decided that this is really one of my favorite ways to color is with colored pencils, I went ahead and invested into a large set of the Prismacolor colored pencils. I do not suggest doing that unless you really like to color with your colored pencils. These are expensive, and if you're not going to use them a lot, you can get by with using your cheaper kids colored pencils. I did for years. But colored pencils is one of my absolute favorite ways to color. I don't do it a whole lot because it does take a little bit longer to really build up that color with them, but I enjoy it. It's one of probably my most favorite way to color, actually. So that's why I invested in these, and that's what I'm using on my Kraft cardstock. But please do not think that you have to go and purchase these expensive pencils to get this look. So there are two sets of leaves on here. There are hydrangea leaves and there are peony leaves, and also stems as well. So I'm using two different sets of greens here. So I've got three of a darker set and then three of kind of lighter shades of green. So I'm just switching back and forth between those two and coloring in all my leaves first. Then I'll go ahead and move on to the flowers. Now for the leaves, I said I'm using three different shades in one set. So on one leaf, I'm using three different shades to really bring in that shading. And I am using these just like I kind of do my alcohol markers as well. I start with the base of my lightest color, I go to my medium color, and then I go to my darkest. Then once I get that darkest into the places I want, then I bring back in my medium and I fan it out a little bit further and blend out my darker shade. Then I come back in with that lightest shade again and I blend out all of the colors together. Now these pencils do blend a little bit better than my cheaper colored pencils, but they're higher quality, so they're going to. I didn't need to end up using my odorless mineral spirits or Gamsol, whatever you want to call it, and blending stumps. However, you could do that if you needed to get some more blending. Also, whenever you are using your colored pencils and you color over stamp lines, because it's building up wax upon wax, layers of wax, you are going to distort those lines and soften those lines and maybe even cancel them out altogether. Now, I didn't go back in and restamp this at all. However, if you lose some of those stamp lines, you can go back in with your Misty and just restamp those stamps right on top of it with your dye ink. Make sure you heat set it over that wax just to make sure that you don't smear the ink at all. Or you could go in, you could heat emboss over this, so maybe stamp in black and then go back, restamp with your Misty, and use a gold embossing powder or something like that. You can also take a pen and go over those lines as well to really bring them back to life. I didn't do any of that. I kind of added some of my lines back in with my darkest shades. You can also do that as well, like I'm doing here. Go back in with your darker shades and add back in those lines, and they really show up well. Now, once I had all of my leaves done, I went into my peony flowers. Now, I'm coloring all the peonies the same color, and I will be also coloring all the hydrangeas the same color, just to keep things simple. You could always switch that up. You could use some pinks, some reds, some blues, some purples, whatever you wanted to do here. It really is up to you. But for my peonies, I did both of them the same colors. So with that lightest color, while I had it in my hand, I went ahead and colored every peony with that lighter color. Then I'll come in with my medium color, color all the peonies, then with my darkest and do the same thing. So I'm not constantly switching out my colored pencils, and that saves on time as well too. However, with a card like this, you do want to make sure that you have the time to color it in. Like I said before, my colored pencils take quite a bit more time than my alcohol markers. They probably even take a little bit longer than my watercolor because I am not the best watercolorist, and I don't let things dry in between layers. So my colored pencils are actually the longest form of coloring for me, but like I said, I enjoy it. So also, I am spending a little bit more time on this because it is a single layer card, a true single layer. I'm not adding any die cutting. I'm not adding much more stamping besides this. My stamping that I've done is going to be my focal point. When it is your focal point, I like to put a little bit more effort into my coloring. Now, if this was just going to be the background of card, I was going to add some die cuts, some maybe vellum on top of it, whatever, maybe put a shaker over this, or things like that. Then I don't need to spend as much time. But because this is my focal point, I'm going to put in those extra steps and really blend out this color, really make sure it's nice and blended, nice and bright and vibrant, and really catches the eye. Now I'm going to zoom you in to show how well these pencils blend here. So you can see that I have put down my first round of colors, and I'm going back in with my lightest now and blending this out. You can also see here how it cancels out a little bit of those stamp lines, but here I am coming back in with that darkest color and going over those, so all those petals really come back to life inside that flower. Now on this little one, I didn't have to do much blending. It's so small, I really didn't need to do a whole lot, but you can see as I lay down the color how well it blends out once I bring in that lightest. Again, I'm going to do the same thing here on this one. This was not as big as a flower, so I actually came in with my darkest. And then I'll go ahead and come back in with my medium color and then blend out with my lightest. On some of these, you may get by with just one layer of color. On others, you may have to go back in with the third layer. It really just depends on how the wax lays on top of the images. So I came back in with my lightest color and blended that out. And then for this one, I'm coming back in with that darkest and adding back in those details. Now for the hydrangeas, I wanted to keep them really kind of veiny looking almost. So I'll show you how I do that. First, I'm using a very light blue. It's almost white looking, and I am laying down that first round of color. I did come in with a true white and put that right in the center of the flower. Now for my medium color, I am kind of pulling this out, and I'm not using a rounded motion when I'm coloring. I'm almost making stripes and really fanning out that color. And that's going to help give the leaves of the flower a little bit more of a veiny look. Now I'm coming back in with my darkest color. This isn't much darker than that medium shade. I didn't want it to be. You could go darker. You could also do 3 different shades of 3 different colors if you wanted to on a hydrangea. I would suggest looking up, searching hydrangea in Google, picking a picture that you like, and then copying the colors from that. So once I came in with that darkest color, I came back in with my medium and then my lightest. But I didn't blend out as much. I really wanted to keep those fans or those veins in that flower to really help with the interest of the image. And because I have these images on here that are hanging off the edges of the cardstock, if I ever got a little lost in my image, you can see there that I just pulled back in that stamp, and I am looking back at that stamp as my reference point. So I'll line up the image with my stamp and see as if something is hanging off the edge, is that supposed to be a leaf of the flower, or is it supposed to be a green leaf? So I look back at that stamp a lot for my referencing, so I know what to color each of those individual images that are hanging off the edge, especially the very small ones on that top flower. They could almost be hydrangea leaves, or they could be like an actual green leaf. So I search back at that stamp, and that really helps me out to get my colors right. Now you've probably seen on the back of my cardstock here that I did get a little ink from my Misty on there. I didn't have a backing paper in there. I really should have. So I got a little ink smeared on the back of that. I don't worry about that. I can dust that off with a sanding block later on if I wanted to. But really it's the back of the card. It doesn't bother me that bad. So I just left it alone. So I very quickly went ahead and blended out the rest of those flowers and then put white little accents in the center of each flower. And then I moved on to stamping my sentiment. I'm using the Sending You Sentiment Builder stamp set. This is from Inspired by Stamping as well. And I'm using black dye ink in my Misty to stamp this down. Now I was not quite sure about the placement, so I put a piece of acetate over my card first and stamped it down to see if I liked the placement of it. And then I'm looking at it, making sure I like it. If I wanted to move anything, I could then, and I could use that acetate piece to kind of help me figure out exactly where I want to put it. I ended up being happy with the placement, so I left it on there, and I'm going to stamp it down directly in the center of that with some black dye ink. It's just a standard black dye ink, but if you wanted to, you could match your ink for your sentiment with the flowers you have stamped. But that finishes off the card for today. It was a whole lot of coloring, but it is a true 1-layer card. But because I used my colored pencils on Kraft cardstock, it really gave it a fun and interesting look. As always, I will leave you guys with just a few pictures. For more information and the supply list on this card, you can head to my blog. I will leave that link in the description box below. Thank you guys for watching today, and happy crafting!